Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This first hour, we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about what is happening in the state of Texas, and in particular, go back to an interview that we did a week ago on this new media platform, which I think you're really going to be interested in, the Texan. And you can go to thetexan.news, or of course we have a link on that on our website. And you remember that last week we had a chance to talk with former State Senator Konni Burton. Today we're going to talk with her, as well as Drew White, who is the senior editor. And this is important in this first half hour to talk about this one, because I really want to encourage you to subscribe to it, as I have. But also, this is kind of do or die day today, because if indeed certain bills in the House, Texas House, are not heard, that's it. They die. And we'll talk a little bit more about the sales tax plan, Ken Paxton, and a number of other stories that are actually on the Texan. Now, if you are not a subscriber as I am, you can simply go there and look at a few for free. But as we go through this, I think you'll also see the value of actually subscribing and having that come to your inbox on a regular basis. Konni Burton, of course, is a friend of this ministry, been with us before, former state senator, and now the, if you will, the genius behind this new outreach, the Texans. So, Konni, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby. I can say that genius has never been put with my name before, so I appreciate that very much.
The impetus, how's that? Let me
I'll
before
be on
we get
regularly now.
Yes, you're the genius for the moment. I think this is a great idea. And in just a minute, I want to ask you some questions about this, because since you've been on last week, people have asked me. I don't know if they ask you on the line, so I'm going to ask you the questions they're asking me, see if you can answer them. But just before we get any further, Drew White is the senior editor of the Texan. If that name sounds familiar, he used to actually serve as the senior federal policy analyst at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Also served as the domestic policy advisor for Senator Ted Cruz, individual that brings a lot of experience. Also has worked as a strategist with Heritage Action for America. And Drew, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kerby, thanks very much. Pleasure to be here. And Connie's being humble. She is a genius.
Yes.
She is a genius.
Well, let's see what we can before we get to Drew and some of the stories. Okay, Connie, some people already asking me, all right, this, do you think this thing's going to last? I said, yes, I think it is. What are they going to do when there's no longer a Texas legislature? I said, well, first of all, the legislature is always around. Yes, it's not always in session, but you're going to have a lot of stories that you'll cover even after they finally say sine die and end up going back to their homes, because there are just a lot of other stories in Texas that the mainstream media is not covering very well. True?
That's exactly correct. One of the things, obviously, campaign season is going to ramp up. And,
yes.
Unfortunately, it seems like we're in a perpetual campaign season these days, right? But nonetheless, this is important. And so campaign season will ramp up. We'll have a lot of stories on Texas races that are going on, not only at some point, sometimes locally, but certainly statewide and at the federal level as well. But, one of the things that we really want to focus on is after the fact, after this legislation has been passed, let's talk about how it actually affects our everyday lives. We certainly get out there and talk about it, during the legislative process, so people know whether they want to support or not support any particular piece of legislation. But afterwards, once it's actually become law, is it doing the things that it was supposed to do? What's the impact on Texans' lives after the fact? And I will tell you what, that's something that's never talked about. There's so many times when people kind of, get so upset, and there's all this news about how it's going to be this horrible piece of legislation. For instance, I think one that comes to mind was the anti-sanctuary city, when they were trying to ban sanctuary cities last session, right? I mean, it was just a total uproar, and the sky was going to fall, and this was horrible, and I couldn't believe it. And, of course, it passed, became law, and we haven't heard a peep about it since, right? So, those are the kinds of things that we want to follow up with after session so people can see, was all of this just clickbait type articles that were out there? Were these legislators that were just using the issue to, send out fundraising emails? Those are the kinds of things that Texans need to see later, so that they could then, know whether their elected officials are speaking to them frankly or truthfully, or have some political motivations behind it.
You're good. And let me just mention that if you're interested in knowing more, the Texan.news is on our website, pointofview.net. And you're really singing my song, because I say so often it's true of the mainstream press, but also even sometimes the talk shows and everything else. They'll get into an issue, and then the next day you don't even talk about it and go, well, what happened? How did the vote go and all that? So that's going to be good. But let me come real quickly to Drew, because one of the many articles that you have posted is tonight, every unheard House bill will die. And since I have been following, for example, Candy Noble and some others saying, I'm hoping my bill will be heard, because if it doesn't get heard today, that's the end for this session. So this is really one of those kind of crunch time situations, or as some people have said, making Mother's Day really miserable. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. No, this is probably the one day, right, in the House where if you need to get in touch with your legislator, good luck, right?
Yeah, not a chance.
They're not a chance. They are trying to ensure that, they get a second reading on their bills, that it gets in a position where, it gets through before the midnight deadline, so that the Senate can hear it and possibly pass it before the session ends. And, we've got a really great article up there that a lot of folks probably don't know about, and you're not going to find it in other media outlets, which is, Mackenzie Taylor wrote it. It's very detailed. It explains how the deadline that's been put in place is in the Texas state constitution in the House and Senate. And if you don't, if your bill isn't heard by the time, the clock strikes midnight tonight, then, that's too bad, right? You're going to have to wait until the next session to get another opportunity at it. And, I think your audience would be interested to know one of the bills that may not make it, and it's looking like it won't, is the heartbeat bill.
Yes,
right.
There you go. Which we're going to talk about tomorrow with Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter and what's happened in Georgia. But we thought we'd be also talking about what might be happening in Texas. But we'll see.
Yeah, no, and you would think, Texas as pro-life and as sort of right of center as most of the folks are, you think that'd be, a bill that would be moving forward, but it's not. It's actually stuck in the Public Health Committee right now. And so, that's a bill that is unlikely to be heard right before midnight. So Texas will not, make that step forward to join Ohio and to join Georgia in passing legislation on that front. So, it's hard to say right now how many bills will die tonight. Until we get closer to that point, closer to midnight, it's hard to say. But, it could be just a few dozen. It could be, hundreds. It's hard to say. But
sure, legislators
are scrambling right now to ensure that their priorities are heard and they make it through so that they can continue debating them and possibly pass them before the end of the session.
Well, let's take a break and we'll come back. This is what sometimes we call the Mother's Day Massacre. And I might just mention Mackenzie Taylor also, of course, has experience having worked with a state representative as well as, of course, actually helped manage Senator Konni Burton's campaign. So these are people with a great deal of expertise. We'll come back and continue our conversation about the Texan right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A slide from a university biology lecture went viral because it illustrated the parallels between fetuses and cancers. Many of the Twitter comments were disgusted that the professor's slide referred to the fetus as a legitimate parasite that invades a mother and manipulates her immunity. A picture of the slide was posted by Stanford medical student Dylan Griswold, who did so in order to address what he feels is the increasing tendency to describe pregnancy as a disease. He believes that makes it easier for Planned Parenthood to perform more than 300,000 abortions each year. The course at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine has the title Evolution of Human Disease. The slide attempts to explain the human tendency to develop cancer. Both a fetus and cancer invade the body, grow rapidly, and manipulate the body's immunity. The Twitter post generated thousands of likes, mostly from people who were appalled that a university biology class would dehumanize an unborn child to the point of comparing it to cancer. Others defended the course, arguing that the slide was taken out of context. After the slide went viral, the professor responded in an email to his class. He explained that most of you probably realize that my point was to show that mammals are especially prone to invasive cancers because mammals evolved invasion placentation. He was not trying to indoctrinate students, he says, into believing that fetuses are cancer. I take the professor at his word, but I also realize that in our politicized world today, proponents of abortion have worked very hard with language and imagery to dehumanize the unborn in order to make abortion acceptable to society. Describing a fetus as a legitimate parasite while also comparing it to cancer furthers that argument. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Konni Burton as well as Drew White. And Konni, just before we go any further, let's talk about if somebody wanted to subscribe to the Texan, which I have done, and if they would like to know more about it, they can go to that website, and there are some real options. As I mentioned, you can certainly from time to time read a particular article for free, but you are looking for individuals to join with you so that you can pay the salaries of people like Mackenzie and Brad and Drew and others, right?
That's correct. Thank you so much for being a subscriber, Kerby. We appreciate it so very much. Yes, we are a subscription-based operation, and the reason that we're doing that is because we want to be reader-focused. So much of the time in media, the models are a nonprofit to where they are more focused on generally left-of-center donors when we're talking about the media world, that is. And so obviously their content is more geared toward those who they want to fund their operation. Or there are advertising-based operation, which they are more focused, in my mind, more focused on clicks to sell to advertisers. So they're more focused on that kind of revenue. What we are reader-focused. We are paid for by the readers. We can stay a small, very agile organization to move in the directions in the stories that our readers want to hear. We're not interested in, clickbait. We're not interested in going out and finding big donors. We're interested in what the readers want to read and hear. And I don't mean, when I say hear, I don't mean that we're, telling them what they want to hear. We're giving them facts so that they can make up their own minds on issues that, affect their everyday lives. And so we do have 3 free articles a month, so they can get some articles without having to subscribe. If they are willing to give us their email address, they can get a couple more free for the month. But the first tier that we'd like them to subscribe to is they can, if they give us a full year, if they commit to a full year, if they commit to a full year, they can get the monthly subscription rate to as low as $7.50 a month. Or they can do it monthly, and it'd be $9 a month. We like to say that, maybe that one extra meal out or maybe those couple of extra Starbucks that they get a month are better served getting this information so that they can know when they go to the ballot box who they need to vote for or the types of issues that they need to, be for or against. And yet they're not having to do all the work. We're doing it for them.
I think it's just a great opportunity. And again, we have some of that information available on our website. Of course, you can just go to thetexan.news. And if I can for just a minute, Drew, let's go to, I mentioned, of course, Brad Johnson just a minute ago, another individual that is writing, and his piece on the Big Three's sales tax plan has officially collapsed. I was in a conversation the other day with Mayor of Aledo, as a matter of fact, and she was expressing some of her concerns. I said, well, here, let me just send you this because it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But the idea was, here's a way we can reduce property taxes by doing a tax swap, increasing sales tax. I never thought that was a real good idea, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. What do we know?
Yeah, no, that apparently is pretty much dead, at least the idea. And what they were trying to do is they wanted to increase the sales tax by 1 penny on the dollar to help, quote, buy down the sort of climbing property tax rates in Texas. And for those that don't know, Texas property tax rates are, extraordinarily high. A lot of your listeners who live in Texas, I know, are sitting there nodding their heads going, yes, they are. And the idea was, we would increase one tax to lower the rate of growth, not to decrease necessarily, not a straight cut, but to lower the rate of growth in property taxes going forward. And that fell apart largely because there was some polling done. And the polling showed that across the board, Texans weren't real thrilled with the idea of a sales tax increase. And a report came out from the Legislative Budget Board that showed that if you're making under $100,000 a year, chances are that if that proposal had gone through, you would actually be paying more in taxes overall. Mm-hmm. And so that was that. When those things became a reality, I think for the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, the members obviously were very uncomfortable moving forward with that plan. And it seems like we're now moving in a direction where they're talking about spending. Right, the entire conversation so far has been focused on increasing one tax to sort of decrease another, and the spending part of that equation has not really factored into the debate very much. And it seems like you've got proposals from Senator Paul Betancourt. He's got ideas, other revenue options out there, and you've got other members that are now coming out being like, well, guys, why don't we, maybe look at reducing spending to help offset that property tax increase, which is a novel idea, right?
Konni, I want to for just a minute, I want to come to you because you've seen these debates before. Is our problem in Texas because we aren't taxed enough or we're spending too much? What's your thoughts?
Softball there, right?
Yes, I think I knew what the answer was before I asked it, but I oftentimes do anyway.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that because why is that so hard? I don't get it for elected officials, not all of them, but too many of them, that they just don't get it. Of course, it's a spending problem. Of course it is. We need to talk about that. I appreciate so much Drew bringing that up, because that is where the problem lies. We need to talk about reducing spending, not more ways of creating quote-unquote revenue. That's not the direction we should go. And so, I think the message came through loud and clear. I am guessing, too, that so many constituents got a hold of their reps and state senators and said, we don't like the direction this is going. And so, therefore, that's why the legislators pushed back. Not all, but, enough that they changed it from this tax swap. Here's the deal. Going into 2020, good grief, why would any Republican want to try and explain that they were for a tax increase? They can say it's a swap all day, every day, but their opponent on the other side of the aisle is going to call it an increase in taxes, and that's what's going to resonate. And so I'm glad they're moving away from that.
Let me just, before I let you go, talk about the fact that we've only talked about two of, I think, about a dozen articles just on the front page there. Of course, one about Ken Paxton, which we're probably going to talk about tomorrow a little bit more on the coalition of states to overturn Obamacare, some on the tax swap, a variety of other issues, including Chick-fil-A and those kinds of topics. So if people are interested, again, just remind us before I let you go, how people can connect up to the Texan and how they can support you.
Sure. So it is the Texan.news is the site, and they can go there and take a look and read some free articles. And then, of course, we've got a subscribe button that we would love for them to click on to and subscribe. But we're on all the social medias as well. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So if they want to just dip their toe in the water a little bit and just kind of watch us that way. But I think they're going to be really, really pleased. We are right of center. We are unabashedly right of center worldview. But we're also not carrying anybody's water. We are presenting the facts from our worldview, which means that we're not going to, use reproductive health care as a term for an abortion. That's what we mean by right of center. We're not going to be hostile to the worldview of those on the right of center that we see so much of the time in media today. So, again, while we're unabashedly right of center, we are providing facts so that, because we believe in the individual. We believe that once the individual reads the facts, they can make up their own minds of where they sit on an issue.
I might also mention, too, that these are very readable. Every one of these ones that I have in front of me here, when I print it out, it's a picture on the front page, some articles and the rest. And I think that's important, too, because, Drew and I, we probably nerd out and we'll read a 15-page Heritage Foundation white paper. But a lot of people are saying, can you just give me the facts? I'm busy. So, yeah, I'll read one page, but I'm not going to read any more. And so you really kind of distill it down. And that, I think, would be very helpful for listeners as well. So I appreciate both of you joining me, and I hope we can do this on a regular basis because of this new hour that we have here. I'm able to focus on the state of Texas, and that's exactly what you're doing in this new media venture. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Kerby. We appreciate it.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, posted a couple of articles, and we'll get into everything from where we are in the campaign with Joe Biden to how this vigil last night, because of the Colorado shooting, turned into a political event. Also, the contrived crisis that we have right now on this whole idea of holding the Attorney General in contempt, and a number of other issues we will try to get into. So we'll do that. And let me just give you an advance warning that at 1 o'clock, we'll be talking with our friend J. Warner Wallace. He is the co-author of the book So the Next Generation Will Know. His co-author yesterday was with us, Sean McDowell, but maybe you didn't have a chance to hear that since it was in the third hour. So we'll be talking with him. And then the hour after that, at 2 o'clock, Skip Heitzig will be with us as we talk about his new book, Bloodline. So we've got a lot to cover, and we'll try to do that right after these important messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation. If you'd like to join our conversation at all, that number is 1-800-351-1212. You'll find that we have posted an article from our friend Jim Garrity, The Ironic Implications of Biden 2020. And I might, if I have some time in the next segment, quote from a few articles we posted yesterday, which we never had a chance to get to. But in fact, I had some people saying, are we only going to post the one article? I thought, well, yeah, because I didn't even have a chance to talk about some of those yesterday. But let's get into this real quickly. Jim Garrity's pointing out that there's just an incredible irony in all of this. And that is, if you have listened to any conversation we've had, and we'll probably have it again tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition with Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford, is that I have been predicting for some time that we probably are going to have what you might call a woke primary. And that is that there are just too many Democrat activists that are convinced that we need to have a woman, a person of color, maybe both, like Kamala Harris. We have to have somebody that's a different orientation, like Mayor Pete Buttigieg or something like that. And that's not necessarily where we are headed at the moment. Now, again, any poll in May is meaningless when you talk about the fact that the first caucuses and primaries take place January, February, March. But I also have pointed out that Super Tuesday, that first Tuesday in March, it may all be over by then because so many significant states with so many delegates will have been selected. But that being said, with that disclaimer, Jim Garrity points out that since Joe Biden, former vice president, before that former senator, since he has announced his presidential run, he led in one national poll by 21 points, then 32 points, then 30 points, then 26 points, and 24 points ahead of Bernie Sanders. Now, that could change. It could be a short-term bump, but it's been a bump that's lasted for a pretty long period of time. So that's the case. Now, some people have said, yeah, well, it would probably have helped him even more if he received an endorsement from former President Barack Obama, which he did not, and Barack Obama said he's staying out of this. But I love what Jim Garrity says. Biden doesn't need the formal endorsement of Barack Obama because he's already received the clearest de facto endorsement imaginable. Obama wanted Biden in the Oval Office. If he ever died or was incapacitated, Obama effectively made his 2020 presidential endorsement in the summer of 2008. I agree with that. But the point that he points out after this is after all the talk of the most diverse group of candidates in American history, that'd be on the Democratic side, and for all the identity politics obsession gripping this party, the Democratic nominee could indeed be old, matter of fact, very old, he says, straight, white, male. Post-Obama Democratic politics would not be focused on a Generation X or millennial figure, but instead on a baby boomer. So that's kind of intriguing. Now, Jim Garrity also says that this would mean that Joe Biden would be a little more centrist, and that may be why some Democrats think maybe he would be the best to run against Donald Trump. He says, Biden 2020 would explicitly or implicitly promise a return to the Obama-era status quo. The Trans-Pacific Partnership would be back. Finally, he'd have a Democrat willing to stand up for demonized billionaires because he said at one time, I don't think 500 billionaires are the reason we're in trouble. Ideas like a new universal basic income would be off the table. And as vice president, Joe Biden defended immigration policies in 2014 that were designed to assess asylum claims quickly and return those who did not qualify, and that the vast majority would be returned to their countries of origins. If indeed he still held to all these, there wouldn't be much difference between him and President Trump. But let's first of all recognize that Joe Biden quickly can change his views, and you would hope that the mainstream media would say, now, wait a minute, Mr. Vice President, you said this in 2014. Now you're saying this in 2020. But, of course, we also recognize that the mainstream press probably would not hold him accountable. But I do believe others would. And so it will be interesting to see how that would play out if indeed he becomes the nominee. The other problem that Democrats are going to have to deal with is not only is he very old, he's very white, and he's very straight, and those are not necessarily what some of the activists were looking for. When you have this comment about wokeness and the need to be understanding that some of the things you might say could be seen as a slight, an insult, maybe even trigger warnings are necessary when the former vice president actually speaks. I love Jim Garrity reminds us that this is a guy that jokes about Indian Americans owning 7-Elevens, uses terms such as Shylocks and terms like the Orient and some other things, which I just got to believe are going to make at least some people grimace in the Democrat Party and might be a reason enough for him to not be the nominee. But I thought if you would like to read this article in its entirety, it is there on our website. Let's turn our attention to the national issue. Yesterday, the House Judiciary Committee approved a contempt of Congress citation against the Attorney General William Barr. Now, for people that aren't in the news cycle, like you probably are if you're listening to this program, they'll say, well, what did he do wrong? Well, they won't probably get really positive or even accurate coverage in the media. But let's at least acknowledge that the citation, first of all, was only approved along party lines, which shows something right there. But it was based on the refusal of the Attorney General to comply with the demand to release the full unredacted Mueller report. Now, the bottom line is first of all, Attorney General William Barr was not even obligated to release the report at all, has released first a summary of it, and then the report itself, where redactions were brought about by those individuals that were aware of something that happened in the grand jury or was under an FBI investigation. But I think most people will not know, but you'll hear it here, that the Attorney General even made a special version of the report available to members of Congress, which actually they say had less than 2% redacted. Those would just be those things that would just be so in violation of any kind of national security. And interestingly enough, not one member of the House that's a Democrat, at least, has bothered to look at that substantially unredacted report. So you can see that a lot of it's political. And, of course, the way in which this will be pitched is the way it's been pitched by the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, who, after they actually brought the contempt citation against the Attorney General, raced to the microphones and declared that we're in the midst of a constitutional crisis. No, we're not, but nevertheless, that's probably the message you're going to be hearing in the news over the next couple of days. But just before we take a break, if we also turn our attention to Colorado. I have a commentary coming out next week on shootings. And last week and even earlier this week, we spent a little bit of time talking about shootings, and one more took place. And this one, fortunately, was one where there was much less loss of life, in large part, as I'm going to talk about for just a minute, because of a young person that actually gave his life to stop the shooters. Turns out there were two. One was identified as an 18-year-old individual. The other initially identified as a juvenile boy, but later identified as a female. But because a juvenile, we don't know as much there. But if you go to, for example, the media post of the shooter, that we have his name, and I don't give it as a standard policy, it's his social media posts are just full of anti-Christian invectives, anti-Trump slogans. A car seized from his home had the F-bomb spray painted on it, along with 666 and a pentagram, so that tells you a little bit about him. But the big concern is they were having a vigil the other night, actually last night, and you instead had individuals that just seemed to be tone deaf about the fact that this is a time to just honor this young man who gave his life, the hero, Kendrick Castillo, 18. But instead you had Laura Reeves, who was Moms Demand Action, decided to politicize this and blame the NRA, to demonize anybody who believed in the Second Amendment, and told students to register to vote, stage walkouts, raise money, use social media to promote gun control. If that's not bad enough, you figure, well, some of those activists, they don't even have any kind of sense. You have the Representative Jason Crow and Senator Michael Bennet, who also so politicized this that some of the young kids from that STEM school, Highlands Ranch, actually walked out even while you had a member of Congress and a U.S. senator speaking, because, as they said, what happened at STEM is awful. It's not a statistic. We can't be used as a reason for gun control. We are people, not a statement. Talked about the fact that the crowd cheered loudly in response. This was not a visual. It was a purely political stunt. And they said we didn't want Kendrick to be a prop. We wanted Kendrick to be mourned. And if nothing else, just shows you how even something like a memorial gets politicized in America. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention again as a program note that J. Warner Wallace will be with us at 1 o'clock. We'll be talking about this book, So the Next Generation Will Know. We had a chance yesterday to talk with Sean McDowell in the third hour, but many of you didn't have a chance to hear that, and I thought it would be good to hear from both of them anyway. It's such a great book, and it would be a great resource for parents, for Christian teachers, and most importantly, I think the primary audience that will benefit from this would be youth pastors, how to really prepare this next generation for the challenges that they're going to face. And as I mentioned before, we only have one article that's posted on the website today because I was going to go back to some that we didn't get to yesterday. And one of those has to do with a piece by Guy Benson in which he says, I'm in shock because the New York Times concedes there's a crisis at the border. Now, if you are an individual that gets my daily Viewpoints commentary, you will know that 3 days ago, that would be May 6th, I actually talked about evidence of crisis on the border because I think for any fair-minded individual, you'd have to say, look at the number of people crossing the border. But I also gave some very good statistics that came from the editor of CNS News on the most busy, or the busiest, probably a better way to say it, areas of district courts, and those are all at the border because of the individuals that have crossed the border with illegal intent. Well, interesting enough, Guy Benson says everyone knows the old sayings about broken clocks and blind squirrels, right? You know, even a broken clock's right twice a day. Even a blind squirrel can find a nut. He says, I'm still genuinely surprised by this one. The editors of the New York Times, one of the most reliably liberal mainstream publications in America, are no longer able to ignore or abide the ongoing chaos at the southern border. I'll just read a little bit of Indeed. And this is a shocker, but let's give credit where credit is due. This is one of those times we can say, thank you, New York Times. You actually gave us the perspective that I think many of us have had for some time. It says, I didn't think I'd see this in the pages of the New York Times. President Trump is right. Woo. There is a crisis at the southern border, not just the one he rants about. Yeah, they had to get that in. But then they go on to say that record numbers of Central American families flee violence and poverty in their homelands. They're overwhelming U.S. border systems, fueling a humanitarian crisis of overcrowding, disease, and chaos. You think? I'll skip down a little bit further. On Wednesday, the White House sent Congress a request for $4.5 billion in emergency funding to help manage the surge. In a letter to lawmakers, the acting director of the White House Budget Office, Russell Vought, sought to convey the scope of the challenge and talked about, of course, in February, as I mentioned in my commentary on Tuesday, you actually had more than 76,000 illegal border crossers and inadmissible aliens. March, that number exceeded 100,000. And so that is the case. So anyway, the editorial goes on to say funding for vital services is not expected to last through the fiscal year. They go on a little bit later saying several $100 million would, however, go towards shoring up border security operations, including increasing the number of detention beds, overseen by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. This, for Democrats, is a non-starter. So again, they're acknowledging that this is something that should be done. The New York Times is saying it should be done, and it's not. And they, again, are trying to be sympathetic to the Democrats in Congress, but they say until better policies are in place, Democrats need to find a way to provide money for adequate shelter. And so if that's not enough, since especially this is the Texas Hour, let me give you a Twitter post by the governor of the state of Texas. That would be Greg Abbott. And that is Greg Abbott in his Twitter posts. This goes back to May 1st, but still, recently. He said, ICE is cracking down on fake families using children as pawns at border. I can't believe some people say the border is not an emergency issue. And look at these numbers. The governor of the state of Texas says this: Texas is about to spend almost $1 billion in state money to do the federal government's job. Pretty amazing. And again, Dan Crenshaw, who we'd like to get on the program here, again represents the 2nd Congressional District in the state of Texas. Does our immigration system incentivize child trafficking? And, of course, the argument that he makes is. And so there are just a number of issues that have surfaced. And let's give credit where credit is due to the New York Times actually saying there's a crisis at the border. And again, if you think that there's a snowstorm in Hades, you might be believing that, because the other story I have in front of us is that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California also is starting to recognize that there's a problem at the border. Hard to believe, but again, this is the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. Could it be by some miracle that anti-Trump judges are recognizing that their hijacking of immigration policy is contributing to the mess at the U.S.-Mexico border? That's the hopeful way to read the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision late Tuesday to stay a district court injunction against the Trump administration for returning asylum applicants to Mexico while they await a hearing. And so this was one of those rulings where you thought that they would actually strike down what the Trump administration is doing, and instead they actually removed the stay that was established by the district court and recognizing the crisis at the border. So here I have in my hands something we would agree with from the New York Times, and here I also have in my hands something we agree with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I don't know what else to say, and that maybe it's a full moon or something, but we are starting to see common sense breaking out in some pretty unexpected places. One of the other articles I posted yesterday, which we did not get to, and maybe we'll get to next week, or maybe even tomorrow if there's some time, Cory Booker's dangerous gun control plan. You know, lots of times people say, we're not after your guns, but if you see Cory Booker, who again is running for the presidency, a senator from New Jersey, and probably trying to find some way to get some attention, has put together a plan that has the usual list of, universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons, prohibition of certain kinds of magazines, and on and on and on. But then, interesting enough, also wants to establish not only a federal gun registry of guns, but a federal registry of gun owners as well. That is, according to the plan, Americans wishing to exercise their Second Amendment rights would have to apply to Washington for permission, not just once, but every 5 years, and inform the executive branch of each weapon they own in their home. And so this is something very different than anything that has been proposed in the past. And if nothing else, also argues that anyone that finds themselves on the terror watch list, and that includes a lot of law-abiding people. At one point, Ted Kennedy, Senator Ted Kennedy was on that list. I know Jonah Goldberg was on that list, a number of other individuals, but that would be used as well. And, of course, the article goes on to say how some of these attempts to register guns and gun owners in the past haven't worked out so well in Canada and New Zealand. First of all, they were terribly expensive and abandoned. They worked well in Venezuela because it was a way to disarm those individuals, and so you can read that if you'd like to as well. One of the other ones I thought I'd mention just before I ran out of time is when you go to Starbucks, not only do they filter their coffee now, but they filter their Wi-Fi. Our good friends at Enough is Enough have had a petition going for years telling Starbucks that if you're going to provide free Wi-Fi, at the very least, filter out those sites that have pornography and child pornography. And they've been doing this for about 5 years, and finally they were successful. So that means the next time you go into a Starbucks, not only are they going to filter their coffee, they're going to filter their Wi-Fi. And again, congratulations to Starbucks after 5 years doing the right thing. That must be a full moon. All sorts of things I didn't see coming, and we're announcing them today here on Point of View. Let's take a break. Jay Warner Wallace will be with us right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to this program any length of time, you know that we like to talk about theology and apologetics and worldview. We also have a real concern about the next generation, whether it's a Generation Y. One of the reasons we do a millennial roundtable is really to focus on that. Now we're even starting to talk more about Generation Z, or the iGen generation, the digital natives, if you will, individuals that have always grown up affected by the digital world. And so how can we prepare them? And this book we're going to be talking about this hour is one that would be an ideal resource for you if you're a youth pastor, if you're a Christian teacher, but if you're a parent or a grandparent, you're going to want to get this book as well, because it really is all about what we can do to not only teach, but to train them to be more effective and to not have the kind of, if you will, loss of Christian conviction that sometimes takes place when we send young people off to college or we send them out into the world. And the authors of this book, Sean McDowell was with me yesterday in the other hour that we broadcast, but in this hour, I am so privileged to have with me the other co-author, J. Warner Wallace. He's been on the program with us many times before. You've seen him on television as the cold case homicide detective. He's a speaker, he's an author, he's a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. Also serves as an adjunct professor at Biola University and a faculty member of Summit Ministries. He and his wife also have put together very popular books for kids and have even created the Case Makers Academy. And we also have a link to coldcasechristianity.com with J. Warner Wallace. So, Jim, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, it's so good to be with you. Now I've got to lie and say nice things about Sean, and hopefully I can lie about him the same way he lied about me.
Well, and we've never really done this where we've had two authors on 2 different days, but they've been 2 different hours. So first of all, some people may or may not have heard that broadcast, and I would encourage you to watch or listen to both of them. Of course, we put them up on YouTube. But in some respects, you come at it very differently. Anybody that knows Sean McDowell probably knows his father, Josh McDowell, and here he grew up in a home where the 2 parents were members of Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Cru. Your background, J. Warner Wallace, is very different, and that, in some respects, is one of the reasons why I think it is so helpful to learn a little bit more about your family background and how you became a Christian later in life. Explain that, if you might.
Well, yeah, I wasn't. I mean, you always envy the people who have something different than you have. It seems like, right? It's pretty bad that we do that. And I think in some ways, I can only imagine what Sean must have been like growing up with somebody who was probably Josh is probably more like me than I'm like Sean, in the sense that I was not a Christian until I was 35. So I was very much but I mean, I was pretty vocal in my opposition to the people I knew in my life who were believers, and I certainly did not think this was worth entertaining at all. I didn't know any Christians who could make a robust defense for what they believed. As a matter of fact, when I would push back on some of the claims of the few officers I knew at the time who were Christians, they didn't seem like they could really defend what they believed, aside from some personal experience, and everyone's got one of those. I had my own personal experiences. Why should I think that theirs are any more reliable than mine? And so I really felt like this was not even worth examining. But then ultimately, my wife was more interested than I was, and she talked me into going to a church here. I put it off. We moved into this neighborhood about 3 years before she finally convinced me to go to church here. And she didn't know much about what to expect either. So we walked into that setting, and we had been together about 18 years at that time. And I sat there and listened to the pastor talk about what he explained. He described Jesus of Nazareth as a smart guy. As a matter of fact, he said he was the smartest guy who ever lived, and his moral teaching was greater than any, basically established the foundation for Western civilization. And I thought, really? So I went out and bought a few Bible and started to dissect it the way I would dissect suspect statements. I used to do a lot of forensic statement analysis of suspect statements, and I just kind of took that approach. That's how I became a Christian. Now, I'll tell you, as soon as I did that, ultimately, when I did become a Christian, I wanted to jump in and help. And I had kids. I had, at the time, like a first grader and a third grader. So we started kind of sitting in on the children's classes. And if you sit on children's Bible studies and children's ministry very long, they are going to employ you. They're going to basically say, hey, you've been here every week. Why don't you just lead this class? And that's how I first got started teaching and I didn't know anything. I mean, I just basically, luckily I had curriculum. I could get like 1 week ahead of those kids. And I was teaching stuff that I barely knew myself. But ultimately, over a number of years, I eventually attended seminary. I came out with a degree, and then I started leading children's upper elementary, and then finally, as a youth pastor for a number of years, bivocationally, I was working homicides at the same time. I would be at church and get called out for a homicide. My family just knew, okay, so this is someplace. So when you get called out, we won't be obviously having to leave the service. But I did that for years, and what we learned, much of which was a train wreck, if I'm honest with you, because we had to learn by trial and error.
Yes.
That's the kind of stuff we're trying to pass on in this book.
Well, and again, I think you've done a very good job and appreciate the work that you and your wife have done, Susie, on really educating the young generation and doing it in a way that's so interesting. And, as somebody, I was thinking about this the other day, I've been doing radio when Marlon Maddox was the host as early as 1980. And I've been a co-host or guest host or even the host since 1986. That's like a third of a century. And I've been doing apologetics ever since I joined Probe Ministries. But when you come to this, you say, J. Warner Wallace did all sorts of things that should have been done a long time ago, and that is using kind of the inductive method and the idea of being a detective, which is so attractive to kids. I've taken some of your books and given them to some of the young kids that are in my Sunday school class, because mostly it's an adult class, but some bring their kids because they love this stuff. And then all the diagrams and the illustrations and everything. And you've kind of put the whole idea of apologetics and how to defend the Christian faith on a new level. So if nothing else, that's the debt of gratitude we all owe to you because of the kind of expertise you've brought to this.
Well, that's been the greatest joy, has been the Casemakers Academy. That has been so much fun to see people send us pictures of their kids with these certificates. You can earn these certificates. We kind of think of it like a police academy, right? You go through 8 to 10 chapters, and at the end of that, you're going to come out with a certificate program. And kids actually love to print those certificates. We have little name tags, that have the badge on it, the whole bit. and I think it's really it's my hope is, look, if we want to teach critical thinking, because we believe that critical thinking gets you here. It will get you here. You don't have to abandon your mind and your thought life in order to become a Christian. In fact, the more critical you actually look at these claims, the more confidence you'll have that they're true. But if nothing else, I'd like to just prepare a generation to examine claims critically, and that's something we're going to have to spend time, teaching these skill sets, these tools that we use to determine what happens in the past. That every crime, remember, is an event locked in history in the past that we have to examine and try to piece it back together. And that's a skill set that will serve you well, even if you're not a Christian. But for sure, we want our young Christians to have that ability.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about these generations. What do we know about them? And then how can we really prepare our young people for what they're going to encounter in the future? Lee Strobel has been with us by phone and even in studio, says this may be the most important Christian book of the year. What's more vital than understanding how to teach the truth of Christianity to the next generation? It is published by our good friends there at David C. Cook, about 200 pages. So the next generation will know, preparing young Christians for a challenging world. We'll talk about some of those challenges right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A slide from a university biology lecture went viral because it illustrated the parallels between fetuses and cancers. Many of the Twitter comments were disgusted that the professor's slide referred to the fetus as a legitimate parasite that invades a mother and manipulates her immunity. A picture of the slide was posted by Stanford medical student Dylan Griswold, who did so in order to address what he feels is the increasing tendency to describe pregnancy as a disease. He believes that makes it easier for Planned Parenthood to perform more than 300,000 abortions each year. The course at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine has the title Evolution of Human Disease. The slide attempts to explain the human tendency to develop cancer. Both the fetus and cancer invade the body, grow rapidly, and manipulate the body's immunity. The Twitter post generated thousands of likes, mostly from people who were appalled that a university biology class would dehumanize an unborn child to the point of comparing it to cancer. Others defended the course, arguing that the slide was taken out of context. After the slide went viral, the professor responded in an email to his class. He explained that most of you probably realize that my point was to show that mammals are especially prone to invasive cancers because mammals evolved invasion placentation. He was not trying to indoctrinate students, he says, into believing that fetuses are cancer. I take the professor at his word, but I also realize that in our politicized world today, proponents of abortion have worked very hard with language and imagery to dehumanize the unborn in order to make abortion acceptable to society. Describing a fetus as a legitimate parasite while also comparing it to cancer furthers that argument. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
The book we're talking about today, So the Next Generation Will Know, Preparing Young Christians for a Challenging World. And J. Warner Wallace, one of the things I appreciate about this is it's very practical. You have kind of blow-up quotes and sidebars. If you're a Christian educator, poll your students. If you're a youth pastor or minister, seek to understand your students. If you're a parent, ask a few questions. So you give a lot of good, creative kinds of ideas so that in some respects, people, if they're looking for this to be kind of your standard apologetics manual, that's not what it is, although you certainly cover that. But you really give some really good practical ideas so that I could put this in the hands of a parent saying, I'm kind of concerned about where my kids are going on this. Or you could hand this to a teacher at a Christian school or a youth pastor in your church and say, here's some ideas that would help prepare them for what they're going to face when they get out into the workaday world.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a lot of this, and this is where I think that the joining to forces with Sean was so powerful. Right? We each bring something different to this, but both of us committed early. This has to be, if it's not practical, we have written a number of books that explain what is true about Christianity. They're what books. This really was intended to be a how-to book. So if you're looking to figure out, well, what is the case for Christianity, that's a different book. But if you're thinking, I know enough about my Christian worldview that I want to pass it on to the next generation, that either I'm raising that generation or I'm leading that generation or I'm teaching that generation, fine. Now the question becomes, well, what are the unique characteristics of this generation that either make this a challenge or that we need to address in order to be more effective as teachers? And I think that's really what we were trying to do, is make it intensely practical. So you're going to have a lot of things you come away with, I hope, from this book where you go, okay, yeah, I can do that. I can do that one thing. Let me do that one thing, and I'll improve my odds of passing on the faith to the next generation.
Well, and one of the things I appreciate is in the very last chapter, it says, since you stayed with us this far, there's a good chance you may be feeling overwhelmed right now. And your goal is not to have everybody do everything in this book, although there's some obsessive compulsive that might try. They're saying, pick something that works well. But you said something in passing that we really need to focus on for just a minute. What makes this generation different? I mean, kids are kids. I think some people would listening to us would say, so what's the big difference? And I'd say, well, one very significant difference is social media, and that seems to show up again and again in this book, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But look at it this way. There's even a more overarching. So sometimes what's specific about a generation is an overarching transcendent thing, which it kind of runs like the foundation we have to stand on. And sometimes it's just little niche-y specific things that we can kind of knock down as we go along. And there's an overarching thing that's happening with this generation in the sense that, think about this, Kerby. When I was growing up, I don't know how old you are, but I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And at that time, you didn't have a lot of choices in media consumption. You just didn't. If you're going to watch the news, you had 3 networks you could pick the news on. That's it. You couldn't. And by the way, if they all kind of took the same approach, you were stuck with that approach. Right now, this generation has grown up as digital natives, and they have complete access to be able to custom tailor any consumption of media they like. So we do the same thing. If we have a certain point of view, that we can find a news outlet out there that will pretty much be an echo chamber for our pre-existing point of view. That's true for young people as well. Well, they have autonomy the way that we have autonomy. They can pick what shows they want to watch on so many networks and so many platforms, from Netflix to Amazon Prime to whatever it may be. YouTube has become a huge platform for original entertainment, original broadcasting. They can pick any source they want and watch it on demand. Now, what that means is we've increased their sense of autonomy, both informational autonomy and along with that, behavioral autonomy. Now, here we are as parents, and we recognize pretty much up front that the Christian worldview says that before we can begin, if you want to be a Christ follower, you're going to have to lay down one thing, your autonomy. Well, really? We're going to say that's the message that we're going to deliver now to a generation in which the technology has given them a heightened sense of their own autonomy? Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the challenges, the kind of foundational challenges we're going to have to deal with when we talk to our kids, because I think our kids right now, do you remember if you wanted to start a new show on TV, you would wedge it between 2 popular TV shows. So the 8 o'clock show is popular and the 10 o'clock show is popular. If I'm launching a new show, I put it at 9. Why? Because we didn't even have remote controls. People would not get up and change the channel, okay?
Now you sound like me, since I am older than you. Yes.
Yeah, so you get a sense, right, that back in those days, there wasn't a lot of choices. Well, now you can take that thing out of context, out of its. It doesn't matter what time it airs. I'm going to watch it when I want to watch it. I have complete control of my environment. Well, all that's going to do is heighten that sense of I don't need anybody. I actually, with the technology, can control my entire surroundings, including the ideas that I process. So I think it's going to be important for us to recognize that one of the things about being a digital native means, number one, I can research everything you tell me. I can fact-check everything you tell me, and I can find an alternative to everything you tell me.
Yes.
That's just the way it is, okay? And so we have to know that up front. And it's also going to mean that there's other things that come along with the digital social media age. I mean, you know this as well as I do, that you're going to become less and less patient. I can access information immediately. I think attention spans are going to shorten. It doesn't matter who they are. They have shortened for us as adults. As old folks, I have a shorter attention span than I did 5 years ago. This kind of media forces that direction, right? If you can't get that thing said in a few minutes, they're going to change. They're going to click over. You know, it's interesting. We measure the success of videos online now based on number of seconds they are watched. Mm-hmm. So why do we do that? Because this digital age is actually – so I think it's going to be important for us to understand that that's just the kind of – you know, you're not going to be able to pontificate for a half an hour on an issue that you could actually tweet in 280 characters. We have to learn how to master communication that is shortening. And my mom, it drives my mom crazy, right? Because she's in her 70s and she's like, but look, I want to reach a generation that speaks a different language in essence. I have to learn to speak that language.
I think so. Just before we take a break, one other thing that you talk about here is not only, of course, are they digital natives, but here's the irony. They're also very lonely, and that is that we are more connected, if you will, in terms of our technology than ever before. But it's back to, bowling alone. And, of course, Senator Ben Sasse has written about this, and we talk about this oftentimes in our Millennial Roundtable. Even though you are connected in one sense and have lots of, quote, friends, there's a sense of loneliness that this generation faces that is almost unprecedented.
Yeah, we talk about walking with people, and how when we walk with young people through different stages of their life, that we grow and are deep in our relationship, and then we also earn the right to speak into their lives. But the idea of walking with somebody requires something that is not available in the digital age. It requires physical proximity. You can't walk with somebody if you're not standing right next to them physically. The fact that you might be on the phone while they're walking does not mean you're walking with them. So walking with them, that term we use to describe what it is to go in relationship with somebody through a period of time, is a great analogy, is a great description of what is really required. And what happens is the minute we move away from physical proximity to people, that's an important part of this, because, the gesturing, so much of communication is nonverbal. So much of communication is gesturing. It's what we see visually in each other. It's looking into someone's eyes and seeing to their soul and saying, you're hurting, I can tell you're hurting. You can't do this in the digital age. I don't care if you've got video. That physical proximity shows me so many other visual cues that I can then read the person I'm with to understand what they're feeling. So I think you're right. What's happened here is we have shifted away from physical proximity. And then when you do that, you give up a big chunk of what it is to be in a relationship with somebody.
Well, again, we're talking with Jane Warren Wallace. And again, if you'd like to know a little bit more, first of all, the book should be available in your local bookstore. But again, we also have a link to coldcasechristianity.com. And that is a place where you can not only find this book, as well as many of the other books that he has produced. Lots of great videos and podcasts. And of course, he's an individual I follow. Saw you in a uniform yesterday, even at I guess it was Instagram's where I saw that. And so I get a chance to follow you and also figure out all the places where you go running and all the rest. So if you want to link up with J. Warner Wallace, we've provided some opportunities for you to do so. And for those of you that have said, you're talking about this academy, what's that all about? Well, we'll come back and talk about that. But even during the break, go there and you can click on the button that says Kids Academy and find out a little bit more about Case Makers Academy, because I so often get questions about, do you have something for younger people? And we do. There's some books that we always recommend in the past, but I also love to always recommend some of the material that's available through the Case Makers Academy as well. So that is available. So if you would like to know more about J. Warner Wallace, if you would like to schedule him to come and speak at your church or your conference, if you would like to use his app, podcast, videos, and all those resources, they're all available at our website, pointofview.net. Or you can simply go to coldcasechristianity.com. And, of course, we're talking about this book today, co-authored with Sean McDowell, So the Next Generation Will Know, Preparing Young Christians for a Challenging World. When we come back, what about some solutions? We not only want to teach, we want to train. There's a difference between teaching and training. We'll talk about that with J. Warner Wallace right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
J. Warner Wallace is the co-author of this book with Sean McDowell. So the Next Generation Will Know, Preparing Young Christians for a Challenging World. I might just mention, forward by Nick Foles, Super Bowl MVP, some great accolades from Al Mohler and Lee Strobel and Meg Meeker and Dennis Rainey and all sorts of people that have been on the program, like Jonathan Morrow and Derwin Gray and Nancy Piercy and a variety of other individuals. And if I had been asked to it, I would have endorsed it as well because it's such a great resource. But just before we get into the book again, Jim, let's, if we can, talk about what's available at coldcasechristianity.com, coldcasechristianity.com, because as I mentioned just a minute ago, we can find your writings, videos, podcasts, curriculum, the Kids Academy. Tell us what's there if somebody lands on your website.
Oh, you're going to be so sorry you said you would have endorsed it, because the next book, you guess who's going to be knocking on your door? Anyway.
I'm a J. Warner Wallace fan, so it wouldn't be hard. Wouldn't be hard at all.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So years ago, as a youth pastor, I started thinking, well, look, you get the opportunity to teach your youth once a week. And I would prepare like all week for this, I mean, I would take like 10 hours to write and create the media for this presentation I'm going to give the students. I'm studying, I'm getting ready, I'm trying to think about what is the scope of curriculum. We talk about that in the book, what kinds of things should I be teaching on? And then I'd do it, and my 50 students would see it, and then I would go back in the archive for another 2 or 3 years until I'd pull it out and try to use it again. And I thought, so I started a blog. At the time, it was on a website called pleaseconvinceme.com. And that just grew into this website when I wrote the first book. So a lot of this stuff is the same stuff that I was teaching high schoolers. I mean, to be honest, I think probably 70% of it that's on there is I'm still writing it as though I'm teaching high schoolers. Now, it turns out that I would raise the bar for high schoolers. I mean, I thought that they could really take on a lot more than we were accustomed to feeding them in youth ministry. So these articles you'll find at Cold Case are really articles that I think are kind of stretch young people, but you'll find them useful as well. And I try to, I want to stretch young people, because I discovered that as I was teaching my high schoolers, my own daughters and my youngest son was probably in junior high or maybe upper elementary, and they caught everything. So it turns out that you'd be surprised what kids will catch if you make it visual. If you do this other thing we talk about, which I'll talk about in a minute, the 2 whys for every what, but what coldcasechristianity.com is just an archive, and I try to post something new every day of the week. So there's a new article or a podcast or a video 5 days a week. Now we've shifted toward 2 videos a week instead of 1, and we'll probably go to 3 here soon, because what we're seeing is that digital shift. That what's happening is that students will, they really are, the most popular search engine for me is Google. And that's true for my generation. But the most popular search engine for Gen Z is YouTube. So if they think, well, how do I fix this broken clock?
Right.
They're not going to go on Google to find that answer. They're going to watch the video. I recently replaced the headlights in my car. Well, what do I look? I'm searching on YouTube. Because it turns out all the responses are there, and you could actually watch the video and change the headlights in my car.
That's exactly what I do. And again, it's funny because if you're really into the digital world, I find that there's not a big gap between me and some of the ones that attend our Millennial Roundtable, because, again, that's kind of the digital way we go about it. While I'm talking about digital, I might just mention there's a DVD series, a video series, So the Next Generation Will Know series, and you can find that and the curriculum at Cold Case Christianity as well, or you can buy it online. And so that's just another way to take those digital native kids and to get their attention, because you are such a visual teacher, and I think so many of us are visual learners as well.
Yeah, and we've all got it all streaming at Right Now Media also, because it just has to be on a streaming platform.
Right.
I mean, think about DVDs. The quality, to get on a DVD, you've got to take it down to such a low quality, and young people are used to watching high-def streaming video, and they expect it to kind of look like high-def streaming video, so that's what you can get at Right Now Media. But I'll tell you this, I think that what we have to do is kind of find out, look, the idea we talked about earlier about a little bit just about 2 whys for every what has been, I think, the key of my teaching at coldcasechristianity.com. It certainly was the approach I took with my students, and that was simply that I knew that this generation needs to know the 2 whys for every single objective truth claim we make. We make a claim, that's a what claim. What is true about God? What is true about Jesus? What is true about the biblical worldview? What is true about sexuality under the biblical worldview? Whatever the what is, I think young people want to know now, well, why? Why is it true? Why do you think, on the basis of what evidence, do you expect me to accept that? Because the other side, trust me, they think that they're very scientific and they're evidentially based, and they're not going to make a claim unless they can give you evidence to support their claim. They think that our view is devoid of evidence, that it's purely a kind of accepting by blind faith kind of a proposition. So I think the other side has kind of mastered or cornered us into thinking, our young people at least, Well, you've got a choice. You can believe that thing for which there's no evidence, or you can believe this secular view that we have now substantiated with science. Okay, I want to be able to give the first why for any what claim. Why is it true evidentially? And the second why is probably more important, and that is, okay, even if you made the claim and you've given me a reason to believe it's true evidentially, why do I care? I mean, why is it important to me? I mean, that sounds like an ancient claim. It might be important to you, but why should that claim be important to me? And that's the second why that I think this generation needs to hear. And if all you did as a parent,
yes,
because I'm very good at making what claims, claims about what is true for my kids. But if all we did was make sure that we don't make a what claim unless we include the other two whys, you will see a change in your conversations with your kids. And you will also see at least a reasonable look. In the end, if young people want to chase their own passions, they're going to chase their own passions. I get that. But I used to always say as a youth pastor, if you're going to do that, that's on you. If I haven't taught you what is true in a way that's accessible, that's on me. So I think that I want to make sure that students at least do the most I can. And then I expect that some of them are going to pursue their own silliness, because I did that for a number of years, and I think a lot of us do that. That's okay. That's that rubber band theology. Don't go too far, because when you let go, it hurts more. It snaps back a little harder. So try to stay close. But people are going to have a season, perhaps. I know I did. But I didn't know what was true, so it was harder for me to come back to it. What I want to make sure is that young people know what is true. So if they have a season of stupid, that's on them.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. And again, two whys for every what, and that is one of the great takeaways. But another one is this idea of training versus teaching. And I think it's so helpful that in the back of the book, there's an appendix that suggests various conferences where you teach and resources, but you also have a sample theological trip, an itinerary if you went to Utah or you go to Berkeley. And I know that that's something that Sean has done. It's something you have done. And that's this idea of training. So let's go into your background in the police force and recognize how important training is for just a minute.
Yeah, we are constantly required by post-certification here in California for law enforcement to be trained regularly and to document that training to keep our certification. Now, what you'll notice is they'll set aside then in our calendar, our deployment calendar, we'll have set aside training days. They're not teaching days. They're training days. What's the difference? Well, training is teaching toward the challenge that is inevitably on your calendar. So we know that if we're going to go to a training day, and it's going to be on, let's say, pursuit driving, well, we have to do that about once every 2 years. It's a whole day where you're in the car driving as fast as you can in the tightest corners without trying to hit any cones. And the reason why it sounds like fun, it is fun, but the reason why we do that is because we know that pursuit might pop up at the end of the shift or in the middle of the shift tomorrow. That happens a lot. You get in a couple pursuits a week. So that's on the calendar. Okay, that's going to happen. So now you're teaching toward this inevitable challenge that's on the calendar. And that's what turns teaching into training. It's the inevitable challenge that's waiting on the calendar. If as pastors, as parents, as educators, we are not putting the inevitable challenge on the calendar, then we're just teaching. If you want to make a difference in the lives of young people, shift from teaching to training. But that means it's not about you studying harder to know more about what to teach. It's about you getting your calendar out and saying, hey, guys, on this date, we're going to go do this thing that's going to require us to have this amount of knowledge. And so we better study because we're about to do this crazy thing. And we do that with young people all the time. And I started doing it about 15 years ago, and Sean heard about it. I was working with a guy named Brett Kunkel, who's got a ministry called MavenTruth.com.
Sure.
It's a great ministry. And we developed this trip for Berkeley because I wanted my students. I saw that some of my students were walking away in their first year of college, and I wanted to prepare my students I still had to address atheism at the university campus. Well, I said, we got Berkeley. It's only 8 hours away. Let's just do trips to Berkeley every year. And by putting that on the calendar, the 8 weeks that preceded Berkeley were now structured for me as a youth pastor because I knew I was preparing my group. And by the way, you couldn't go. If you missed more than one of those 8 sessions, you couldn't go with us on that trip. And so kids would show up, they'd lean in, and as they get closer and closer, you could feel the tension rise because they knew they were about to get on the campus and be talking to students. And we've given examples what that looks like in the book. It was also given an example of the kinds of surveys we've used with those students. But that putting that on the calendar, it makes all the difference. In the end, it does come down to this. Just do something.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what, I hate to say it, because we have a tendency to fall back on this notion that it's grace that saves us, but doing something actually activates that grace.
Sure. Pick a location, set a date, line it up, get ready to go. We'll be right back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. J. Warner Wallace with us today as we talk about the book, So the Next Generation Will Know. If you'd like to join us real quickly, 1-800-351-1212. We might take some phone calls. Just wanted to give you that opportunity, although I think most of you are kind of just sitting back and listening today, and I haven't done a very good job of even giving you the phone number. But if you'd like to join us real quick, 1-800-351-1212. We're talking about Brett Kunkel, who's been on the program with us before. But one of the things that is in that section there, which I have not mentioned, didn't mention it yesterday, nor have we mentioned it today, when you're talking about doing one of these trips, it could be a theological trip, it could be an apologetics trip, it could be a behavioral trip, or it could be a mixture of those. So talk about that, because in the appendix you have different examples of what could be done. But I'm hoping that some of our listeners that maybe are parents or pastors or youth leaders say, well, that's a good idea, but I don't know where to start. The good news is it's all in the book, isn't it?
Yeah, we wanted to be able to. People ask me, and I've been asking for years because I mention this all the time when I'm talking around the country. And like, well, what, do you have a template for this? So what we tried to do was give you a really strong template for how to lead this kind of trip. When I was a youth pastor, this is another thing we talk about in another chapter of the book. I divided my course and scope of curriculum because I knew that my parents, for the most part, they didn't really care what I was doing with their kids as long as they weren't messing up. As if I can keep their kids from smoking dope and skipping rope, they were happy, okay? So really they were more concerned about the outcome behaviors. But I knew that I couldn't get to outcome behaviors unless I hadn't first laid the foundation theologically, the first what, and then the first why, which is, why is this true, apologetics, and the second why does this matter to my life? That's the behavior side. So I divided my curriculum up into 3 categories that I call tab training: theology, apologetics, and behavior. If as a parent all you did, if you look back at your conversations with your kids, I'll bet you that the biggest percentage of your conversations right now are in the B category. They're about behaviors. But if you want to get to those behaviors, I want you to start thinking about how you have to lay the foundation theologically and apologetically to get to the behavior you're looking for. And so we were very, very conscientious about taking trips in those 3 categories and about designing teaching and training in those 3 categories, always trying to pay either, it might be in a 6-week theology study or a 6-week apologetics or a 6-week behavior, or it might be in one session where we're going to do all 3. But the point is, I tried to strike that balance, 2 whys for every what. Now you've got to go back, and if you measure your conversations with your own kids, think about how much of them are just purely theological or purely apologetic. Maybe we need to kind of increase our conversations in those areas, because trust me, it's when you know what God has done for you. For example, if you want to see submission in the Christian life, you can start with just preaching submission. But if you will preach what grace has done for you first theologically, you'll end up with the kind of submission you're looking for. You're far more likely, I think, to get that if we understand what God has done for us. So a lot of this is about trying to find balance in the teaching to achieve the outcomes we'd like to see anyway.
One of the things that is early on in the book, it's the worldview triangle, and I'll hold it up for those of you that can actually watch online, but it has at the very bottom relationships, and then up above it worldview, values, and behavior. And so it really gets back to this idea of relationships and the idea of walking with an individual. You know as well as I do that some of the people that do apologetics aren't quite as relationally oriented as you and Sean. They tend to just be focused on truth. They tend to be almost Mr. Spock kind of communicating the ideas and making the case. But that doesn't always work because people need a relationship. And we know that a lot of youth ministers I've run into over the years, they're real good on the relationship, but the content is a little bit weak. And yet you really need to put the 2 together, because this relationship to worldview ultimately leads to this idea of behavior. And that's part of the integrated way in which we need to communicate truth in the 21st century.
Oh, let's face it, with all those information sources that our young people have, what we see growing is not a sense of confidence or trust. We see that decreasing because it seems like there's so much noise out there that no one's quite sure what noise you can trust. Well, it turns out if you want influence, it's connecting the noise, connecting the truth claims to relationship. You're far more likely to be influenced by somebody who has the knowledge but also holds a deep relationship with you. So we can't just have one or the other. It's a both and. And I think if you feel like right now you're making claims to your own kids and they seem to be bouncing off like Teflon, even though you know those claims very well and you can support them evidentially, why are they bouncing off like Teflon? It's time to spend a season building the relationship side of the equation. I can tell you a lot of the young people we saw at universities after the fact who were no longer Christians, when they would describe their own relationships with their parents, they were broken in many ways. And so I knew that it's really about having the time, spending the time. And it may feel like right now you're with an adult child, let's say, or you're somebody in your life where you feel like, man, I just cannot penetrate this wall they've built up. I can't make the gospel clear to them. Well, then take a season of time now with these folks just to develop the deep relationships that will earn you a right to speak into their lives.
Well, just before we run out of time, let's again talk about what is available at your website, coldcasechristianity.com. Again, this book, So the Next Generation Will Know, is published by David C. Cook. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if you'd like to connect up with J. Warner Wallace, One more time, just talk about what is available on your website, because you've got some great resources that will help you, whether you're a parent, whether you're a grandparent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a Sunday school teacher, whether you're maybe an individual that is in one way or another educating the next generation or leading them in one way. You've got some great resources for them, don't you?
Well, let me just point you to one aspect. There's a link there for the Kids Academy. You already mentioned it. And that has been one of our, we are so proud of how, humbled really by the people who are using that academy. We get about 500 students a week who are watching the videos, because every chapter of all the books, it's an academy. So you're going to watch a video for that chapter. There's activity sheets to download, fill-in sheets to download. All that stuff is free. The certificate is free to download. We're trying to make these resources accessible so you can go through and learn the case for Jesus, learn the case for God's existence, learn how to communicate that case. So that's cold case Christianity for kids, God's crime scene for kids, and forensic faith for kids. But the point is, what we really want is parents have an opportunity to get a bunch of free resources that will help them do the heavy lifting. Because in the end, I wish I could just pass it off to a children's minister or pass it off to a youth pastor. But the reality of it is there's a lot of stuff I'd like to pass off that I can't. It's my responsibility. I'm the one who has to raise up the generation that I've been given. And I realize that for a lot of people that sounds intimidating. But trust me, you are already passing on your passion about something to your kids. Maybe it's you're passionate about the Rockets and the Warriors they played last night. If you're a fan of some team, I guarantee you your family is probably also a fan of that team, because you have been able to organically pass on your passion about that thing. Now it's time for us to develop that kind of passion about our Christian worldview and pass that on organically as well.
Well, let's, if we can, again, encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net, or to Cold Case Christianity. And, of course, we have great information about the book, so the next generation will know. J. Warner Wallace, always great to have you on the program, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Skip Heitzig will be with us. We'll be talking about his new book, Bloodline, and so that is something that I know you'll really enjoy, because we're going to talk about the scarlet thread that runs from Genesis to Revelation, from Eden to eternity, and I think this will be giving you a great overview of the Bible. Very similar to one of his other books that we'll talk about in just a minute. But if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like some more information, I'd like to find the link to Cold Case Christianity, of course, you can find it directly, but also we have a link to it on our website, pointofview.net, or simply go to coldcasechristianity.com. If you'd like to know more about the book, it's also available there as well. And so we've got great information for you to click on and to find. And as you go to the website, don't forget that we are donor supported. And so listeners, if they can support this ministry, will allow us to keep doing what we do here every single day. So let's take a break. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your health care. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, so often we've talked about this idea of a scarlet thread that runs all the way through the Bible, and I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation this hour as we talk about this new book, Bloodline, Tracing God's Rescue Plan from Eden to Eternity. It's written by Skip Heitzig, who grew up in California and then later studied under Chuck Smith at Calvary Chapel. Then he and his wife moved to Albuquerque, and of course the Calvary Church there has a multi-site congregation of over 15,000. Individual that has written another book that I would also commend to you that's very similar to this in some ways, and that is The Bible from 30,000 Feet. It really gives you a great overview of the Bible. This one's going to look more at the message of salvation through the Bible, and it is a book that I would recommend along with many of the others. You can understand the book of Genesis, you can understand the book of Revelation, the Daily God book, How to Study the Bible and Enjoy It, and a number of others. Individual with a bachelor's, master's, as well as doctorates, a doctorate of divinity and a PhD in philosophy, biblical, and theological studies from Trinity Southwest University, and an individual that's been on the board of everything from Samaritan's Purse to Harvest, and joins us now by phone. Skip, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, what a great joy it is to be with you and your audience. It's great to talk.
And one of the things I love about this book, and everybody endorses it, Erwin Lutzer's been on the program with us many times before, says that Skip at his best, greatest theme in all the Bible. Of course, Franklin Graham has been on the program with us, Ron Rhodes. Ben Carson was on with us earlier in the week when we were talking about Optimisfits, and so all sorts of endorsements from individuals that have endorsed your book and have also been on the program with us. But the theme here reminds me a little bit of your previous book, The Bible from 30,000 Feet. Sometimes people need a overview, and of course we in seminary sometimes teach Old Testament survey, New Testament survey, but to put the Bible all together and give it some significance is something you're really good at. And this one really kind of traces, if you will, the scarlet thread through all of the scriptures, doesn't it?
It does. It was William Evans who said, you can cut the Bible anywhere and it bleeds. And you're right. I did take the idea of the Bible from 30,000 feet, which gives the reader a working knowledge of every book of the Bible in an easy-to-understand format. But I wonder, what if I went up even higher than 30,000 feet? What if I went into outer space and looked down at the landscape of Scripture? Would I see an overarching theme, or would I see a thread? And the idea was absolutely. Because Jesus is called the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, you would expect to see a constant theme running through it. And that's a theme of redemptive history, starting in Genesis 3:15 all the way onward. So that was the concept of the book, and that's how I approached it.
Well, again, this book is just out. It's published by Harvest House, and if you would like to get a copy, of course, we have every expectation that you probably can find it in your local bookstore, but we also have an information about that, including Skip's website. A little bit later, we'll talk about that. And there's 16 chapters. We'll do our best to try to get all the way from Eden to eternity. I teach sometimes at a Bible Institute. Matter of fact, later this month I'll be in Hungary, and they say one of the problems is they'll bring in a guest speaker, and we always leave Jesus in the grave. You know, when they're trying to teach you the Gospel of John, they don't pace themselves well enough, and they never get to the resurrection. So we're going to do our best to get from Genesis to Revelation, but let's go to Genesis, and that's the first chapter, because that's where the rescue operation begins. What do we need to know about that?
It's called the Proto-Evangelium, or the first gospel. It's the first time God introduces to the world the anticipatory theme of the cross. So it's a conversation God is having after the fall with Satan. And he promises the devil, the serpent in this case, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed or offspring and her seed or offspring. And he will bruise or crush your head, and you will bruise his heel. So it's a promise of somebody is going to be born who is going to crush or bruise the head, the authority of Satan. And, what's interesting about that text is it just says your seed, your offspring. Seed could be many or it could be one. But by the time you get to the word he,
yes,
you understand that he's talking about an individual who will be born. And so that sort of sets the pace from that point on.
Well, and again, that first chapter deals both with Genesis and Exodus. But again, I'm going to keep the train moving down the road because I want to make sure we cover all of this. And the second chapter, There Must Be Blood, really looks at Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are chapters, as you well know, Skip, that oftentimes if individuals decide to read through the Bible, they're pretty well through Genesis and Exodus. By the time they get into Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we've left a few bones there. But there is a very good principle there about the fact that even as we look at the Old Testament law code, as it anticipates the shed blood of Jesus, though very significant principles that are found there in that latter part of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, are very important to later understand the sacrifice of Jesus.
In fact, you can't understand a large portion of the New Testament without having this working knowledge of those books. I think you're right about the fact that you get people reading from Genesis on, and then they just sort of slow down. I call Leviticus the New Year's resolution killer. By the time you're deciding to read through the Bible and you get to that, you just say, "Oh my goodness, forget it." But you would never understand, for instance, the book of Hebrews without a working knowledge of Leviticus, and it is all about blood. It's about shed blood. So I look at that as like a trailer to a movie. It's like a preview of coming attractions. Because by the time Jesus comes on the scene in the New Testament, his cousin John the Baptist sees him coming, and using the motif of those books, he says, "Look," or "Behold, that's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And if you understand the Levitical code and some of those sacrifices, it all makes sense.
Well, and again, recognize that when the psalmist, or in some cases David, talks about delighting in the law, we're talking about those books that most of us have not read. And I think it really helps us understand that we need to really read all of Scripture because, again, these particular books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, very important in terms of the sacrifices. And we'll take a break, and when we come back, we want to then talk about the monarchy, and that will be Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. And then we'll move from there into some of the other passages that will be part of this particular discussion as well. The monarchy in the sense of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And I think you're going to find this book really helpful. Number one, if you're a young Christian, it will help put the entire book of the Bibles together in one book in a way that makes a great deal of sense. If you've been a Christian for a long time, you might have studied the Bible in bits and pieces and stops and starts, and this would, I think, give you a better understanding of how it all comes together. So certainly this book, along with the Bible from 30,000 Feet, are two that I would highly recommend. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Skip Heitzig and give you a chance a little bit later if you want to ask a question. But we have a number of chapters to cover, and we will do that after this break. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the resources we're going to be talking about today, you might already want to go to the connectwithskip.com website. We have that link on our website. We'll come back and continue our conversation with him right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A slide from a university biology lecture went viral because it illustrated the parallels between fetuses and cancers. Many of the Twitter comments were disgusted that the professor's slide referred to the fetus as a legitimate parasite that invades a mother and manipulates her immunity. A picture of the slide was posted by Stanford medical student Dylan Griswold, who did so in order to address what he feels is the increasing tendency to describe pregnancy as a disease. He believes that makes it easier for Planned Parenthood to perform more than 300,000 abortions each year. The course at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine has the title Evolution of Human Disease. The slide attempts to explain the human tendency to develop cancer. Both a fetus and cancer invade the body, grow rapidly, and manipulate the body's immunity. The Twitter post generated thousands of likes, mostly from people who were appalled that a university biology class would dehumanize an unborn child to the point of comparing it to cancer. Others defended the course, arguing that the slide was taken out of context. After the slide went viral, the professor responded in an email to his class. He explained that most of you probably realize that my point was to show that mammals are especially prone to invasive cancers because mammals evolved invasion placentation. He was not trying to indoctrinate students, he says, into believing that fetuses are cancer. I take the professor at his word, but I also realize that in our politicized world today, proponents of abortion have worked very hard with language and imagery to dehumanize the unborn in order to make abortion acceptable to society. Describing a fetus as a legitimate parasite while also comparing it to cancer furthers that argument. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Skip Heitzig, and again, he is the pastor-teacher, Calvary Church, ministering to more than 15,000 people in multiple locations there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This book is entitled Bloodline. It's the idea of a scarlet thread, and in my church, at Prestonwood Baptist Church, we've got actually very interesting various stained glass windows from Genesis to Revelation. But if you look real closely, you can see just a real thin red line, and that is the idea of this scarlet lead thread that runs all the way through the Scriptures. And that's what we're talking about today. We've looked at the first couple of chapters, taking us through the Torah, if you will. But Skip, let's, if we can, go to the next chapter, a strong cord in thin fabric before the monarchy. That would be Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. Now, this isn't quite the monarchy yet, but it is a very significant time in the history of Israel. How do we begin to see that scarlet thread there?
Well, you know, the idea of a scarlet thread actually shows up in the book of Joshua in real time, in real life, and that is with a prostitute in Jericho by the name of Rahab. Mm-hmm. And she is instructed as an act of faith, as a signal of her faith, to put a red cord. She probably had it lying around. She probably dealt in fabrics and agriculture. But she was told to put that out of her window, and that scarlet thread would be something that would be an evidence of her faith when they came in to conquer Jericho. So, the fact that these scarlet threads actually show up from time to time, we're thinking about it symbolically or metaphorically, right, but they actually show up in the tabernacle with in the fabrics woven into the curtains of the tabernacle, the priest's garments, etc., and in Rahab's own life. So it's It's a symbol of saving faith, and it's another sort of tip-off by the Holy Spirit of what we can anticipate.
Well, again, just fascinating to see some of those connections. And let's, if we can, continue on, because you have the bloodline of the Messiah certainly traveling through that, if you will, tribal leadership. But then let's go to the monarchy. The king is coming, and that would be, of course, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Of course, the primary focus there is on Saul, David, and Solomon, but there is where I think we even more in a vivid way see the actual, if you will, genealogy and bloodline of the Messiah. Isn't that true?
Exactly. So, the Bible essentially, if I'm going to back way up a little bit, then kind of zero in on that, the Bible is essentially about one person and two events. The one person is, of course, the Lord Jesus Christ. He's the hero of the story. The two events are the first coming of Christ, where he came to deal with sin by his sacrificial death, and the second event is his second coming, when he will come to rule and reign with those who have been cleansed from sin. Well, what authenticates him is a genealogical record. God starts making promises in the Scriptures to Abraham that through him all the world will be blessed, his seed, then Isaac, then Jacob. It gets passed down through that genealogical record. And then to Jacob's fourth son, Judah, the scepter will not depart from Judah, Genesis 49, or a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh, or the righteous one, the coming one, the Messiah, comes. So we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah. Then it's passed all the way down, just sort of to make it shorter, to David. And he is from the tribe of Judah, but David is the king, Israel's greatest king in the monarchy. And God makes a very unique promise to him in 2 Samuel chapter 7. And that is that he's going to have a son, and or he's going to have offspring. And God promised that he will have a kingdom that will be established, or a throne that will be established forever. And that's a great promise in 2 Samuel 7. So God promises a covenant with him on sort of two levels. First, he promises that his own son, which happens to be Solomon, is going to build a temple and going to have a peaceful reign that God originally promised to David. But then second, that God would establish that throne forever, which cannot be fulfilled in Solomon, but would be fulfilled in the greater son of David, Jesus Christ. So that's why when Jesus is coming into the world, the angel tells Mary that, she said, look, the angel says, look, your son will be great and will be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God is going to give him the throne of his father David. And he's going to reign over the house of Jacob forever. And he's going to have a kingdom that's going to last that will have no end. So the angel for Mary ties in the covenant that God gave through the bloodline, the genealogical record, to King David, and says, look, your son is going to fulfill that. And so that's why the New Testament opens up by saying Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. He is making the genealogical connection with the promises God made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, David, etc.
Well, and again, I found that sometimes is a great message to even preach during the Christmas season, because those genealogies lead up to, of course, Matthew, as well as Luke, giving us those genealogies and how that all fits together. And again, it's just another proof of his messiahship. So again, the monarchy is very important in chapter 4. And then let's, if we can, talk about after the monarchy, beyond fate and nature. That gets us into Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So those are passages that come together because we look at what actually took place after the monarchy was no longer.
Yeah, God always had a witness, and even though Israel was in captivity for 70 years, 50,000 or so left the captivity after 70 years and came back to rebuild the temple. And so the idea of the sacrificial system was reinstituted. The altar was rebuilt with Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, and, they were all about those rituals in the temple. and keeping the law of Moses again. But you have the idea of this temple, which some people, when it was built, thought it was awesome. Some of the older guys thought it wasn't so awesome because they remembered the first one, so they kind of wept over it. But you have a couple of interesting things during that time. First of all, the focus on the temple, and later on Jesus will say, destroy this temple, speaking of his body, and in 3 days I'll raise it up again. He correlated the temple with the temple of his body. And the fact that he would come and offer the ultimate sacrifice that the temple never could. The temple would be a foreshadow of something that would come and fulfilled in Jesus. But then you also have a high priest by the name of Jeshua, spelled with a J. Sort of sounds like Joshua, but we would say Yeshua. And so it's the same exact name. This high priest, during the time of Ezra, is named Yeshua, which is Jesus' name. So we have a reflection in Jeshua, a high priest, with Jesus, Yeshua, our great high priest, spoken about in Hebrews chapter 4. And the writer of Hebrews does say we have a high priest that is unlike the high priest of the Old Testament. And so he makes that connection. So just that name gets our attention and focuses again on the coming Yeshua, who would be our great high priest.
And once again, making the case that you did just a minute ago, I do not know how you could understand the book of Hebrews, in particular Hebrews chapter 4, without understanding how that is connected back to what you have in Ezra. So again, just another implication that if you really want to understand the scriptures, you have to read both the Old and the New Testament. But let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to spend some time for just a minute actually encouraging you to go to his website. It is connectwithskip.com. And I wanted, first of all, for you to be able to find the book there. Of course, you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore. It's published by Harvest House, and I would imagine most bookstores would have it. But if you need it or would like to get or order a copy, you can do so. He also, of course, has an app and a number of other things that I wanted you to know about. So if you wanted to benefit from some of the teachings of Skip, those are all available at our website. And, of course, you can go directly to connectwithskip.com, and we'll talk more about what is there. So you might want to check that over the break. And if you are interested in the book, we, of course, also have a place where you can order it in paperback or Kindle. And I think it will help put some of this together. You may want to get that book as well as the previous one we've just mentioned, The Bible from 30,000 Feet. And you can learn more about the flight and the flight plan and some other things, just some great resources to help put together the bits and pieces maybe you've studied over the years about the Bible in some kind of coherent form, or especially if you're a young Christian. I just can't imagine how this book wouldn't be tremendously helpful to you in trying to get the scope of the entire Old and New Testament. Let's take a break, though. We'll continue our conversation right after these important messages.
Question, do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Telling God's tale, which again, the fabric of the story is the unmistakable blood-red cord of Jesus' sacrificial death. And we've been moving through the various books of the Bible, and we'll move from Eden to eternity in this book, Bloodline, tracing God's rescue plan from Eden to eternity. Of course, the author is Dr. Skip Heitzig. And Skip, just for a minute, before we get back to the book, let's mention your website. We have that on our website, pointofview.net, or people can just type in connectwithskip.com. They can then, of course, see the broadcasts. They can get your daily or weekly devotionals. They can get some of your other books. And you even have an app, which if people wanted to follow you and be involved in learning some of this and applying all of that, it's available. So let's talk about what is available at the website if people would like to take advantage of some of the resources that you've put there.
And I love the app. I'm glad you brought that up. But basically, these are portals into resources, and most of these resources are absolutely free. It's our desire that people would grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ. So I've taught from Genesis to Revelation, every verse of the Bible, 3 different times. We have access on those websites and the app to any of those teachings from Genesis to Revelation. You can take them on the go. You can take notes alongside of them. We have the full manuscript of those available as well if you want to read it. So you can also get books if you want to buy those, but there's just a lot of resources like the daily devotional or the weekly devotional or the messages or the transcripts are available. And I love the app because you can just go to the App Store and either push in my name, write in my name, or connect with Skip. And then you can be in your car or you can be on a run, and you can get access to those truths in the Bible at will.
And again, a 30-day challenge and all sorts of great resources there. And again, some great teaching and a real understanding of the Scriptures. So I'm going to just keep moving down the road because we've been talking about a lot in the Old Testament. So it comes to, if we can now, chapter 6, Heart, Mind, Body, and Soul. This is all the wisdom literature. That would be Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, and Lamentations. Now, we tend to go there, Skip, to get some encouragement, some wisdom, maybe something to lift our spirits. But even there, we can see that this shows this blood-red, scarlet thread that runs through the Scriptures.
Boy, you can, and you can see it in bold relief in those books of the Bible. Those are the poetic books of Scripture. And the idea of the scarlet thread shows that God is behind the scenes overseeing the people, the events, governments, all to preserve the lineage of the Messiah, but also to bring out the feelings in real life of some of the people that were struggling with the most foundational issues of life. For example, the first poetic book is Job. And everybody knows Job was dealing with like the hardest time that life could ever dish out, right? He's going through pain and suffering and losing his family and disease. And he has questions, deep questions about God during that time. But in the middle of the suffering and the questioning and the disparity and the accusations by these so-called friends of his, there are some things where Jesus just pops out. For example, in Job 19, Job says, I know that my Redeemer lives and that he will stand at last on the earth. And he faces his own death or the possibility of it. And he says, I know that after my skin is destroyed, that I in my flesh will see God. So it's amazing that Job, who lived thousands of years before Jesus even walked the earth, he understood the power of resurrection, and he wrote about it, and he affirmed it. And so he's holding on to the same kind of hope that we have when things go wrong in our life, when we go through a trial, when we are suffering. Job, BC, before Christ, was expressing the same kind of hope. So I like to say that, in a sense, Job preached the first Easter message. In fact, the same word that he uses for Redeemer is the word back in the book of Ruth when there was a kinsman redeemer, a Goel, somebody who would pay the price to get the inheritance. And so Job is expressing that way before the event.
Well, again, you won't read the book of Job or even some of the wisdom literature the same without working your way through that. But again, we'll keep it moving because we want to look at the major prophets, and you have a couple of different major prophets. First of all, Major Prophets 1, and you devote an entire chapter just to Isaiah. And then in a minute, we'll get to the other major prophets. But again, Isaiah, pretty easy, I would imagine, for anybody that has a little bit of knowledge about the scriptures to see the connection between Isaiah and, of course, Jesus, because there are so many places where we do see that connection. True?
True, indeed. John the Baptist quoted Isaiah. Jesus quoted Isaiah. All the gospel writers, the book of Acts, they all use Isaiah a lot. It's a big book. There's 66 chapters in that book, sort of like the Bible, 66 books. In fact, there's a lot of similarities between Isaiah itself and the Bible as a whole. But Isaiah is known as the Messianic prophet, and that's simply because of the number and the directness of the predictions about the Messiah that come from that book. And what's very interesting about Isaiah is what are called the servant songs of Isaiah. There's 4 different servant songs that have the emphasis of a coming deliverer. And the things like prophecies like Isaiah 53 is one of the great. It's probably the greatest servant song of all. But besides that, you have Isaiah 7, Isaiah 9, right? The Emmanuel prophecy given. But really, the cream of the crop is in the servant songs, and that is Isaiah chapter 53, that he has borne our griefs, he's carried our sorrows, wounded for our transgressions, by his stripes we are healed. It's unmistakable. When you go through Isaiah 53, and it really deserves a thorough look, it speaks about the origin of the Messiah, the life of the Messiah, the rejection of the Messiah, the suffering of the Messiah, the death of the Messiah, the burial, resurrection, glorification. It touches on all of those themes hundreds of years before Jesus was born, and even a couple hundred years before crucifixion was invented by the Persians and then made more perfect by the Romans as a form of execution. You have in graphic, bold detail, very similar to Psalm 22, these great predictions of the suffering Messiah in that servant song.
And again, Messianic prophecy is so important that we actually have a little booklet here that we make available to you in that regard. And that whole section on servant songs would be just something that would be very helpful if you're a pastor, a Bible fellowship leader, or others to go into in more detail. But let's take the other major prophets. That would be, of course, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Once again, I mean, it's pretty easy to see some of the connection in the book of Daniel, but help us out with those other major prophets as well.
Well, I'll give you an easy one. Jeremiah 31 predicts a new covenant.
Right.
And it's the most unmistakable presentation of God saying, look, there's a shelf life to this Old Testament, this Old Covenant with the law, with Moses, even though the Jews to this day esteem Moses as the most important Jewish person who ever lived. Jeremiah 31 announces, the day is coming, says the Lord, when I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel. And it's not going to be based on the Old Covenant. It's going to be based completely on something that I do in the heart, a regeneration that comes from the heart. So he announces the shelf life and the end of the Old Testament, predicts the new, and that's why when we get to the New Testament, we're not at all surprised that eventually Paul just kind of pushes that aside as, look, the law was good in that it showed us that we all fail and come short of the glory of God, and it served its purpose, but it's a taskmaster, it's a curse. It simply amplifies our need, but the solution is not found in the Old Covenant. The solution is found in the New Covenant.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into the New Testament, but there are chapters there on the minor prophets. That would be, of course, Hosea and Amos and Jonah and Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, as well as Zephaniah, and then some of the other prophets, which would be Joel, Obadiah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. But when we come back from the break, we'll look at the New Testament story because we've spent quite a bit of time in the Old Testament, which, if nothing else, I think helps you understand why it is important for those of us that, of course, teach and preach out of the New Testament to drive people back to the Old Testament, because it would not make sense, especially books like Hebrews and others, without understanding the Old Testament. But when we come back from the break, we'll look at some of the final chapters here in terms of the New Testament history, the church letters, and leading up to, of course, the very important passage in the book of Revelation, because we want to continue to trace God's rescue plan from Eden to eternity. And we'll do that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bloodline, written by Skip Heitzig and published by Harvest House, tracing God's rescue plan from Eden to eternity. And here we have a whole section in the New Testament about the rescue operation complete, and that gives us history. We have, of course, Paul's various letters, Romans and 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, as well as prison epistles like Philippians, Colossians, some general letters, and then finally the last letter, the book of Revelation. Pretty easy to see Jesus in the New Testament history, because that's what those first four Gospels are all about, right?
Boy, isn't that the truth? You know, it was Evans. I'll go back to what he said. He said, cut the Bible anywhere and it bleeds. So you can see that scarlet thread running through different portions of the Old Testament. But by the time you get to the New Testament, You know, you have in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those four Gospels, that's the epicenter of redemptive history. They spend so much time on this idea. In fact, listen to just sort of the mapping out of those four Gospels. There are 85 chapters in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that deal with the last 3.5 years of Jesus' life. They only spend a total of 4 chapters speaking about the first 30 years of Jesus' life, from birth, upbringing, etc. They spent 85 chapters on just the 3.5-year ministry of Jesus. Of those 85 chapters, 29 of them are focused on the final week of Jesus on earth, and of those 29, 13 chapters deal with just the last 24-hour period. So in terms of literary real estate, the great bulk of focus is on the redemptive work of Jesus on the cross. They're saying this is the most important event in history.
And then when you get to the other letters, Paul's and John and others, it's the whole ground, the new ground rules, if you will, of redemption, because we talked about the new covenant there in the book of Jeremiah. And so to understand a great deal of the New Testament is to understand that we have a new set of ground rules, don't we?
Right. He's called Jesus Christ and him crucified. Paul said, 1 Corinthians 2, I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. So redemption is the unifying message of all the Bible, but think of it this way. In the Old Testament, that redemption is anticipated. In the Gospels, the redemption is accomplished. And in the New Testament letters, it's applied. Mm-hmm. So they break it down. The authors, principally Paul, breaks down what that means in terms of doctrine, in terms of history, in terms of depth, in terms of future. Like the book of Romans, you know, his summum magnum, his Magna Carta of redemption, he just drills down into what all the implications are.
And again, we want to finish at least with the book of Revelation. The Lamb becomes a lion. And if nothing else, I know we've skipped over whole sections, and as an author, you probably say, oh, there's so many more things I wanted to say, but I wanted at least to end with the book of Revelation, because a lot of people don't know really how to put that together. And if they don't, I would commend one of your other books that really helps to, individuals to understand that, because that's the capstone of this whole scarlet thread that runs through from Eden to eternity, doesn't it?
Yes, it's called You Can Understand the Book of Revelation. But you know what? Just imagine being John for a moment. You're on an island called Patmos. You're there as a prisoner of Rome. You're isolated. You're alone. It's been 60 years since you've heard or seen Jesus while he walked on the earth. Suddenly, one day, he hears a voice, and he gets a vision. And it's a vision of Jesus, but it's a very different Jesus than what he remembered. This Jesus is blazing. He is... his voice is powerful. It's like many waters. So it's Jesus, but it's a lion-like Jesus. It's the ruling, reigning, second coming Jesus in preview vision form. By the time we get to chapter 5 of the book of Revelation, it's all about the ownership of the earth, the title deed of the earth. There's this scroll in the right hand of God the Father sitting on the throne. And heaven asks the question, who is worthy to take the scroll and unloose the seals? And nobody is there. I mean, of all the patriarchs, of all the angels, nobody steps forward, not Abraham, not Moses, not Jacob, not Joseph, not Paul, not Peter. They're all in heaven at that time. Nobody has the right to take that scroll, which is the title deed of the earth. Finally, as John begins to weep because he realizes the implications of what that means, the elder says, don't weep, for look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has prevailed to take the scroll and look at the seals, or unlock the seals. So John turns expecting to see a lion, but he says, and I saw a lamb as though it had been slain. And we get the idea from the vision, from that chapter, the lamb is the lion is the lamb. But Jesus is portrayed as a lamb having been slain, bearing the marks of a violent death. So what that indicates to me, Kerby, is that when we get to heaven, we're going to see the wounds of crucifixion on Jesus. We know that he rose from the dead with those wounds, because he said to Thomas after the resurrection, put your hand here, touch and see that I'm the one who went through this event of the cross. And then Jesus ascended into heaven with those wounds. John sees him as a lamb having been slain. I think that Jesus is going to bear those marks forever as kind of a signpost, almost bragging rights of this is what it took to buy the earth back, and I'm glad that it bought you and you and you and you, and that we're all in this kingdom together. And so, even there, even in heaven, even in glory, he's bearing the marks of the crucifixion.
Again, we've taken you from Genesis to Revelation. I might just mention that Skip, of course, has written a book called You Can Understand the Book of Genesis, as well as You Can Understand the Book of Revelation. I've, of course, a couple of times here mentioned his book, The Bible from 30,000 Feet. And, of course, we've talked about Bloodline, tracing God's rescue plan from Eden to eternity. But one last time, Skip, let's talk about what we can find when we go to connectwithskip.com. It's a great website. It's a great opportunity, as you said, a portal to all the great teaching you've done over these years.
Yeah, I've had the privilege, Kerby, of teaching through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, as well as topical messages. So we have those overviews. We have the Bible from 30,000 feet in audio form as well as video form. So you can just sort of sit. A lot of Bible study groups around the country tell me that they get together and go through the Bible from 30,000 feet together. We're currently doing that in our midweek study. But we have access to articles that I've written on different topics, books that my wife and I have written together, women's Bible studies and men's Bible studies. So there's just a host of resources. Some you can purchase, but most of them are free. And we encourage our listeners to just kind of peruse, go around there, read some of the articles, get some of that stuff, and just use it. Salvation is free, and so we want to make as much of the resource about salvation as free as possible.
And I might just mention, Ron Rhodes has been in the studio with us many times, says it's rare to find a book that both teaches good biblical theology and deeply touches the heart at the same time. This is why I certainly do commend the book to you. It is published by Harvest House. Look for it in your local bookstore. And, of course, we have a link to Skip's website as well. Skip Heitzig, it's always a delight to have you on the program. I look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kerby. Great being with you, and thanks for taking the time to drill down in this book.
Wonderful resource, and that's why we're covering it here today. Okay, we need to take a break, and so we will see you back here tomorrow. We'll have our roundtable discussion, and there are a lot of issues in the news that we will be discussing, so I hope you'll join us then. If you would like to know a little bit more about the conversation we had with J. Warner Wallace or Skip Heitzig, it's all available at our website, and I would encourage you to maybe listen to the podcast again or maybe even watch it on YouTube. And as you go there, there's also a button that says donate, and so help us restore the culture and bring Christian values to the culture. And if you can help us out financially, we would greatly appreciate that. I appreciate the work that is always done behind the scenes by Andrew and Steve. So I hope that you will take the time to visit the website. I hope you'll join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.